if you think about Eucharistic miracles, so there's been, 50 or 100 Eucharistic miracles in history. If even one of them is true, what does a Eucharistic miracle say? You have this man, this priest, who prays over this piece of bread. I mean, if you look, 30,000-foot view, you have this person who prays over this piece of bread, and then because of that, it ends up bleeding, and it ends up turning into actual flesh, and it ends up, when you look at it under a microscope, it is actually, and there's been all these studies done, right, on the various Eucharistic miracles. There's, without going into the weeds and all of that, if one Eucharistic miracle is true, it confirms the doctrine of the priesthood, of the Eucharist, of apostolic succession, of Christ, of the church. I mean, all of these doctrines suddenly are in one Eucharistic miracle, right, based on the kind of interconnectedness of the teachings of the church. All of these suddenly have evidence in support of them, right?
Yeah.
Whereas, how does any other faith explain one Eucharistic miracle?
Right.
Forget 70 or whatever, right? One Eucharistic miracle. How does any other faith explain them? I mean, it's incomprehensible, right? So the evidence within the Catholic Church just says a lot more than the evidence of any other faith. There's a lot more that, the questions of like, well, what does it mean when a Muslim has these experiences or a Jew has experiences? And I think God does not withhold his gifts from anyone that seeks him with a sincere heart, right? And so he has, when someone in their own tradition approaches him, there are, we ourselves as Catholics, we are bound by the church and bound by the sacraments. God himself is not bound by anything, right? God is not bound by, God can, if a person approaches him with their whole heart, God can do whatever he wants with that person, right? And so again, treading lightly and humbly and approaching this from a very kind of open standpoint, it's like, are there people in other traditions that have authentic experiences with God? I think we have to say yes. Do any of those experiences undermine the truth of the Catholic faith? In all of my research, I would say absolutely no. But the evidence within the Catholic Church, a tremendous amount of it is incomprehensible within the framework of any other religion.
Right. So the miracles purported in other religions can be made to fit with the claims of Catholicism.
Absolutely.
But many of the miracles that are experienced in Catholicism are not commensurate, do not add support. That's really interesting.
Exactly. And so it was this kind of, it was helpful for me to have these kind of different levels.
Yeah, that
kind
pyramid, I like that analogy. That helps, that image.
Right. So if you have, there are 3,000 or so purported apparitions of Our Lady, right? I mean, the church has only put its full stamp on about 15 of them, right? But there are lots of other ones that the church says, I don't know, they're either non-constat or they're right, the three different levels of, right? So there's lots of different, but again, if Our Lady appears, and again, when she appears, you could think of Fatima, right? Like the way that the miracles that happen that are experienced by thousands and thousands of people, right? The miracle of the sun, I'm thinking of. The fact that Our Lady of Guadalupe, that there were like 9 million people that converted shortly after that revelation or that apparition.
Yeah, that the tilma is still around today.
And all of the studies that have been done there, yeah. So again, these are things that if you look at them, if you try to look at them objectively and with an open heart, because again, as you said earlier, and someone who doesn't want to believe can always raise some minute, unlikely potential objection that can allow them to kind of discredit something, right? You can do that forever. But going back to the convergence of evidence, right? This is again why I kind of the similar approach. You look at someone like Padre Pio, who seems like this man in himself kind of brings together like all of them, the potential for the miraculous, right?
That's wild, isn't it? Didn't he live during the time of the Beatles?
He died in 1968.
Okay,
if I remember correctly.
Yeah,
and so he's
levitating. Right. He's bilocating
the stigmata. What's amazing is Padre Pio's stigmata. There were, I think, 12 different doctors that examined him. And some of them were Catholics, faithful Catholics. Some of them were atheists. Some of them hostile to him. They were out to disprove. They thought he was a fraud, that he was a charlatan essentially, and they wanted to disprove what his phenomena as a fraud. And so, if you look at the studies and the reports of what they saw, what they did when they studied him, there are many details that are that varied from time to time. But the one kind of thing that they all agreed on, well, one of the things they all agreed on, all 12 of them, was that his wounds were so deep that when they examined him, that they went through both the epidermal layer and the dermal layer of his skin, right? And so, in other words, they weren't just kind of a superficial wound, but that they went deep enough that they penetrated not just the surface layer, but the deeper layers as well. When that happens, and when a wound heals up, it always leaves scars. But Padre Pio, a week before his death, his wounds completely healed up after being open for 50 years, right? He had the stigmata for 50 years. These wounds that bled copiously, right? We have all these gloves of his that are soaked in blood because of his wounds that just were perpetually bleeding. But yet, a week before his death, the wounds completely healed up, and his hands looked exactly like as if he had never had wounds, even though he had had these profoundly deep wounds for 50 years, which, I mean, is impossible. It's miraculous, right? This is a miraculous healing of his hands. So you look at that and say, even the doctors who were trying to undermine Padre Pio in their reporting, they were saying like, yeah, there's no doubt. I mean, these wounds, some people, I mean, there were, at certain times you could almost see through his hand. The wounds were so deep, right? And so all this to say, so someone like Padre Pio, he himself is really strong evidence, right? But someone can say, well, okay, Padre Pio, maybe I can come up with all these reasons why, right? So if you only had Padre Pio, you would say, okay, well, that's one data point, maybe that's not. But then you also have all of the other saints. You have St. Joseph Cupertino levitating, right? You have 70 different witnesses, 70 different instances with signed affidavits from tons of other people who say they witnessed him levitating, right? St. Joseph Cupertino, so you look at him and maybe you could say, okay, well, maybe there's some, so you keep doing that over and over and over again with apparitions and Eucharistic miracles, and in the same as when we talk about the Holocaust historically, the same as when we talk about within a court of law, frankly, the same way that most scientific theories are established. The theory is established by this convergence of a variety of evidence in different domains that all kind of converge upon a truth, right? That at some point it becomes possible, then plausible, and eventually it becomes, okay, this is more certain than not, right? And so at some point, if you, again, look at the evidence within the Catholic faith with an open mind and heart, you see that God has given us such an enormous wealth of evidence. It's not like, he didn't leave us orphans, meaning like if you have the eyes to see and you're willing to go look, he gave us so much evidence in support of the truth of who he is and who we are in his eyes, the truth of heaven, the truth of hell, the truth of purgatory, the truth of the saints and the Eucharist and all of the various elements of our Christian life. He gave so much evidence that, again, as you said earlier, you can always say, well, I don't want to believe it because of this. He's not going to force anyone to believe it. But if you look at it with an open mind and heart, it seems very clear. And so for me, I came to a place where it was like, okay, there's nothing like this anywhere else in the world. And it became there was a quote by Cardinal Newman. He said, you can neither worship, love, or trust in a merely probable God. You cannot worship, love, or trust a merely probable God. Meaning that if you think, well, maybe God's real, it seems, I don't really know, but maybe God's real. Can you really give your life to something that you think is possible or likely, or right? So in other words, if we're willing to follow the truth where it leads, if we're willing to pray and ask the Lord to guide our steps, to shine the light, and I'm not saying that everybody needs to follow this path, right? Meaning like the Lord works differently with different people. Some people, there's a much simpler kind of grasp on the faith where they've just never doubted it. They know that it's true, and the Lord confirms it for them in a way that is much simpler. And for them, they have no doubts, and they know, and that's beautiful. But the Lord works with each of us wherever we are, according to our dispositions, according to our needs, according to our sinfulness and our wounds. And so if someone is authentically seeking and they're willing to press into the truth and to pray and ask the Lord to guide them, there's nothing the Lord can't do to bring them to deeper and deeper faith in him.
Would you do me a favor and click the subscribe button? I don't know if you know this, but it's 100% free, and it's one of the best ways to support the work that we're doing here at Pints with Aquinas. Help spread these excellent interviews all over YouTube, and I think you'd agree, there's a lot of junk on YouTube. We need more good conversations like this.